Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial on object-oriented programming in C++. So this tutorial video is all about constructor overloading, meaning how to write more than one constructor for a given class and what are its syntax and semantics, what are the ways you can write and what is should be followed as the standard C++ object-oriented programming principles. So let's start with first the header, the skeleton, the declaration, and remember that CPP is the implementation, whatever has been declared in the header, so that we don't have to compile the header. We just carry the header across compilers or any versions. So what we'll do first, we declare the variable, so that we can have a overload constructor. More than one constructor is known as overload. The principle here is exactly the same as functional overload, because in C++ this braces is actually the syntax for the functions. So the constructor and the destructor is actually the function. The constructor is the first function that is actually executed when the class objects start executing, meaning running in the program, and the destructor is the last function that is actually will be running before the class object goes out of scope. So let's create a few more variables. Somehow the Netbeans IDE is not able to identify the string. In C++, the string is actually small case. With respect to Java, it's capital letter. So other languages will have a capital letter string, but in the C++ is small case string. Somehow the Netbeans is not able to catch that is actually a valid keyword. So we have created two private variables. One is the float value and another is the string data type with the variable name as just name. So we create a overload constructor. So this is the overload constructor. It's the same as the before. So this how you start the constructor. So how to have overload is, now we pass variables has the functional arguments to the constructor. Remember, constructor is also a function. So name of the function is tut3 in the namespace of tut3, and we'll pass on the variables, meaning functional arguments, to the constructor, so that we actually step into the domain of overload constructor. So this is a valid overload constructor, tut3 and tut3, and with the semicolon. So remember, semicolon has to be there. Even the class should have a semicolon in C++. Semicolon in the sense this statement ends here. So this is one of the way to have a overload constructor. So how to write uh, the source code, meaning in the source file in the .cpp, how to write the overload constructor. It's the same as before. Tut3 is the name of the function and tut3 is also the namespace. And what we can do is, for example, because these two are privates, let's add a getter function. So because we'll just initialize using the constructor, so we don't have to set it unless you have to really do it. So I've just copy paste for just for saving some time. So please make sure that the data type and the functional name are proper, otherwise we'll have unnecessary debugging steps needs to be done. So I'll implement the last. So we're just implementing two getter functions. So remember, function is also known as the method. So what is the difference between function and the method? In general, the word called method is used for object, the functions inside the class object, meaning the namespace, and the function in the sense it's lying around in the global namespace. So we'll just return this name. So here we value. So we just implemented two getter functions. and this is the overload constructor. So what we can do is look at as you can see, just a function, just like any other function, but the name of the function is that without any return data type. That means it's a constructor. Name of the function is the name of the class, and there is no return data type, and the rest is more like the function declaration what we have done here with more arguments here. So how to set it? So come to the this is the overload constructor in the first format. So this name is actually passed, and this name and this value is actually the functional arguments to the overload constructor, meaning the constructor already exists here, which does not have any arguments in the function. This is the second constructor which has two arguments, and because there are two constructors, meaning more than one, is known as the overload constructor in the object-oriented programming terminology. So what we can do is we can use this name and initialize name to this name, and then we can get initialize this value to this value. So this is the overload constructor. Let's create an object of type tut3, and this is the overload constructor of tut3. Let's print out the values of overload constructor. So remember, this is overload dot so what is the thing? For example, this overload constructor, actually you should keep track of what exactly overload constructor you're using. Here we have two variables that is being used. So here in the, when you create the instance of the object of tut3, which is the overload constructor, this is the standard constructor that is being utilized. So when you're using overload constructor, so we have, if you look at the variables here, we have a string and a float. So we create a string, pass it on to this value, and we create a float. So F stands for float, otherwise it is taken as double. Again, it gets truncated to float in C++ domain. So we put the letter F at the end of the number just to indicate it's a float. Otherwise, you put capital F D, it's known as double. So dot get get name, just not put and OC underscore tut3 dot get value, get float. So let's rename that as get value instead of float. Just not to confuse with the actual variable. So please provide very meaningful names for your variables and the function, so that there's no confusion at all. So I'll just recap. We have created a overload constructor which has two arguments to the function. To the overload constructor is also a function which has two arguments, meaning the variables passing to the function, which is string and a float. We have two getters, one for string, one for float, and we have two private variables, float and string. That's why we have the get function, and the initialization is done in the constructor. So this is the overload constructor. So constructor with the tut3 with the same name of the class in the scope of tut3, two variables string and float, and the name and value is been initialized by the value what we pass on to the constructor. So we created a tut3 object with using the overload constructor. This is the overload constructor #1. This is the first way of overload constructor, because this tut3 is already there. This is the standard thing, same like this, which does not have any arguments passing on to the function. So this is the 3, and so we have passed on two values. One is CPP, which is a string, and 7.3, which is a float, because that is the string and the float for the constructor. And we are trying to put the name and the value, so just to have a meaningful display. So let's run the program. So it has actually printed, and we have got a nan, meaning it's not a number. So if there is some issue, either the variables are swapped or we are passing on to some name. Float this value, float value name, and this name and this value. So there is some problem in the get value float, get name string. It has printed the string, but it's not printing the actual value. So this value here, we're just trying to debug here. Let's remove the F and see how well it works. Now we are getting the same, not a number, nan. Are we overlapping any? No, there is no overlap. So just make sure when you're actually inheriting the classes, the function name, the method names, and the variable names should not clash, so that debugging doesn't becomes a problem. Because when you have the same variable names or the same methods, when you're inheriting in the child class, the child class calls the function, it becomes a confusion whether the function belongs to the child class or it is belongs to the inherited parent class. So that becomes a issue. So just make sure that the variable names and the function names, meaning the method names, are unique to the class. So I'm just trying to debug why it's 7.3. 7.3 is supposed to be supposed to be printing, but it is not printing as 7.3. There is no issues, there is no compilation error, but there is some issue in how it gets printed. So this is the one of the salient issues of having object oriented. So because the complexity of the program goes up and we're trying to debug, so the programmer should have some patience until they find what exactly is the bug. Get value, get name. There is no return here. Sorry for the silly error. There is no return keyword for the get value. That's why it's printing nan. So it printed 7.3. So this is just a silly error. Sorry for the delay and inconvenience for the viewer. So this happens in a day-to-day programming. We forget one of the keywords, or we forget the flow, or forget the syntax or the semantics. So anything can happen. So this one of the because I'm just going through the tutorial video, so I forgot to add the return statement. So now it prints 7.3 here. So this is the one of the way where you can have the overload constructor here. So let's go for this is the first type. Let's go for another way of construction where you actually have I'm just copy paste just to save some time. So let's have another way of second way of doing thing. So instead of having the body in the code, we can actually initialize. So let's have another variable here. So string overload constructor str. So I've just created two string variables, which is private. So don't get confused between string being highlighted, because somehow Netbeans is not able to convince itself that string is actually the keyword, meaning the variable type of it's a data type in C++ domain. So I just created two strings, OC_str and OC_str2. So we provide two string to the second way of overload constructor. So I'm just reusing this. So what I can do is I will add this so that we don't have a confusion of which is the variable in the class and which is the variable that actually given as the argument to the constructor. So what you can do, OCR and I think the compiler will be okay with this. So this is the overload constructor 2. So what we have done here, we created .3, the overload constructor of .3 class. So it has the same name with there's no return type because it's a constructor. So we have two arguments for passing to the constructor, which is both are string, and we created two private variables called string OCR str and OC underscore str2, and we are initializing the OC underscore str OC underscore str2 in the header. So this is the header file, and this is the declaration. So we are saying initialize here itself and provide the body. There is no body. So once we have this kind of a constructs, there should be no body. I mean, there should be no code written in the .cpp file, because we have the curly brace here itself. So this is the another way of having a overload constructor. So what we can do is I will just create a getter methods. So I created two getter methods for the string. So let's implement that in the source file. Then we provide the scope operator for the getter methods. Then we have to put return statement. Last time I in one of the places actually forgot. So str2. So now I have two getter methods because both the strings are private, and this is the overload constructor number 2, which does not have a body declared. I mean implementation, meaning the definition is done in the header, declaration also known as the implementation is done in the .cpp file. So this is here the initialization is done in the constructor itself, in the header itself, meaning the constructor, and in the header itself the initialization has been done. So there is no implementation that needs to be done in the .cpp file. So what we can do, you can just create another variable of 30 type. So we have overload constructor 2 underscore 3, and we provide two string. Let's print it out. OC2 underscore 3 get underscore. So this is the first string. Let's print out the second string as well. So this code completion is actually very good in Netbeans. So what we have done is, now we have created another data type variable of tat3, the class instance OC2 tat3, because this is second overload constructor we are using. So we are overload constructor takes two string, so we have given two strings as argument, meaning the double quotes thing, and just print it out. So let's see, everything is just fine. So there is an error. So this is the compile time error. There is a spelling mistake. So as you can see, we provided Cpp is working. So we have Cpp is working one line because there is no new line character here in this cout. So this is the, so now we have, let's go back to the constructor header. So we have three constructor now. This is the default constructor, no arguments. This is the second overload constructor, which has two arguments and no initialization of the body, which is actually done in the .cpp source file. And the next overload constructor is initialized in the header itself, so we don't have to provide the body in the .cpp file, and hence this does not need a body here, because and it's initialized, and we have the getter methods which actually trying to print Cpp is working. So this tutorial video ends here. This is just to demonstrate the overload constructors, how to do in object-oriented programming constructs in C++ language. So I will end here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for spending so much time watching this video till the very end. Please stay tuned for the additional tutorial videos coming in this series, object-oriented programming in C++. Thanks a lot. Bye.